10 years since the U.S. invasion of Iraq, cancer and birth defects plague the city of Fallujah. The U.S. military's extensive use of depleted uranium and white phosphorus is suspected to be the cause behind this health catastrophe. If Iraqi civilians are still suffering from the aftermath, what role, if any, should the U.S. government play? Vice Media and their new HBO show Vice went back to Iraq to investigate.
We're in the old battlefields of Iraq to see what the ongoing cost of war is when the shooting finally stops.
Clearly, children are suffering. And if the weapons we used really did cause this health crisis, we need to know this.
People don't want to look because if you find something, then you have to do something about it.
This is the world through our eyes. This is the world of Vice.
Joining me to discuss this story is Eddie Moretti. He's Chief Creative Officer of Vice Media. We're also joined by Jason Mojica. He's president at Vice. Ross Caputi. Ross Caputi also joins us. He's an Iraq vet and founder of the Justice for Fallujah Project. And joining us shortly will be Congressman Jim McDermott. He's representative for the Washington State's 7th District. Eddie, I want to start with you because what you saw out there was pretty real, man.
Yeah, I mean, I actually didn't get to go on that particular
What we
trip.
saw, I should say, when we look at the clips, yeah.
Yeah, and when I saw the footage come back, I was really shocked and startled. Jason, one of the producers at the Vice show, he actually went to Fallujah with Shane. Maybe he has some, on-the-ground insights.
Sure, I mean, I think it was incredibly, first of all, it was incredibly difficult to get in to Fallujah. For some reason, it's almost like they just don't really want. There's a big, totally freezing up. Anyway, getting into the hospital, seeing deformed babies, babies with congenital heart defects, and their families, and basically they're looking for answers, and also they're looking for someone to blame. And you know, the U.S. is a pretty obvious, pretty big target.
A pretty reasonable target. I mean, given everything that's happened, when you talk about phosphorus, when you talk about uranium, but talk to me a little bit more about what we saw on the ground. I want people to really get this, because this is a big deal. I want people to really get how crisis level this circumstance is. We're talking about babies being born with severe defects. Mm-hmm. What other stuff are we talking about here?
Congenital heart defects,
respiratory illnesses, various kinds of brain malformations or deformations.
Yeah.
And also what was interesting, sadly, was the kind of after effects of some of the medical procedures, the corrective medical procedures that were attempted on some of these children that were born with various kinds of deformities. They're equipped in Fallujah, but they're not equipped, let's say, like an American hospital is equipped. They can only perform certain kinds of operations there, and so some of the operations actually left some of the children with almost like collateral injuries, like paralysis, and left some of these people paraplegic or quadriplegic. Wow. So it's really. It was shocking. The level of the contamination is pretty shocking. And I guess the people there are really frustrated because no one is really listening to them. At least some people in the medical community are listening, but they feel certainly that the U.S. government and the U.S. public really aren't.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons probably for that, and I guess Congressman McDermott's going to go through a couple of these reasons because he's been really working tirelessly on this. But that was a traumatic war for us, and after 10 years, I think at least this administration is trying to get us out and manage that exit and move to a very a crisis domestic agenda.
Is it hard to keep a spotlight on the suffering that's going on in a place like Fallujah as we're trying to kind of close the door politically on Iraq? As you said, we're drawing down, we're leaving. Does it make it difficult to create this narrative that, look, Iraq is done, Iraq is the past, that's old history, if we're constantly pointing to these young people who have been hurt, if we're constantly pointing to the damage that we've left behind?
I think certainly the American public is kind of done with that war, and they're ready to move on to other things. And I'm not sure that there are many government officials that are really interested in pushing this as an agenda either. I mean, the after effects of war are never really popular for anyone to deal with. And so it's not surprising that now, the Iraqis are left holding the bag. By the way, it's not just the Iraqis, and we have Ross on soon to talk about his experiences. I think the contamination, the toxic effects of some of these munitions were felt and are still being felt by the American military, the people who were fighting boots on the ground.
Yeah, and that's the other scary part, because as we sort of come to learn 10 years later that people have had long-term sort of impact on their body, 10 years from now, we may find out that there's been even more environmental damage, more long-term forms of medical illness to these people. We don't even know fully just how bad things are. You guys put a tremendous spotlight on what we know so far, but there's so much more to be known. And I want to bring Ross in. Ross, welcome. You've spent time. Eddie talked about boots on the ground. Eddie talked about what it meant to be someplace and see these things. Talk to me about what your experience was like.
Well, I was a Marine during the second siege of Fallujah. This was one of the biggest operations of the occupation of Iraq. And it was an enormous operation. There were 5 battalions involved, and we basically laid siege to the entire city of Fallujah, destroyed like 2/3 of the city, created like 200,000 refugees, killed possibly up to 6,000 civilians. It was a really bad moment. And I was part of that, unfortunately.
So when we took positions against the war, I know I did, say 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we began to tell these stories, when people began to broadcast images of just how ugly war is, not just in Iraq, but everywhere, some people said, you're over-dramatizing. Some people said that it's not as bad as you think. Some people said that this is just a necessary part of war. Don't overstate, how bad things are. When you hear stuff like that, having been there, having been deeply involved, what do you say?
I mean, it's easy for people to say that when they're sitting on the sidelines and they really have nothing at stake in it. I mean, this was absolutely catastrophic for people living in Fallujah. Fallujah was a city roughly the size of Boston. There was like 300,000 people living there. 200,000 had to leave their homes and go someplace else, either live in the desert. A lot of people did go live in the desert. I don't know how they survived. A lot of people went to neighboring cities, and a lot of them faced a lot of violence because of the sectarian war that we created in Iraq. Some people had no choice but to go to, Shia areas, and they faced a lot of violence because of that. That's on top of the 6,000 people that were killed because of the bombing and, all the violence that was going on. I mean, how can you say it's not that bad? That's ridiculous.
Tell me what you saw firsthand in terms of the weapons being used, in terms of the type of fighting that went on. Tell me what you saw.
Well, the whole mission was kind of structured indiscriminately. Our command told us that there were no civilians in the city, that everyone we were going to face in the city were combatants. They told us they were hardcore terrorists. And that was actually not true. There were 50,000 civilians still in the city because we did not allow military-age males to leave the city. Anyone from age 15 to 55 were not allowed to flee the city. They were forced to stay in, regardless of whether or not there was any information at all that they were in any way connected to the resistance. So they were forced to stay in the city and make do. And then we bombed the city very indiscriminately for the weeks leading up to the siege, to the actual ground siege. Then during the ground siege, we used indiscriminate weapons and indiscriminate tactics. An indiscriminate weapon, for example, being the white phosphorus, which you drop from the sky and it comes down in these big fireballs that kind of drift in the wind and cover, not a precise target, a big area of land. And we also use tactics like reconnaissance by fire, which is, this is house-to-house fighting. So if you don't know what's in a house, if you don't know if there's fighters or if there's anybody at all in the house, you fire into it first. And then if you hear, screaming or moaning or whatever, you can be sure that there are people in there. We would assume that they were combatants, and then we would probably bulldoze the house to the ground. If you heard nothing, it was probably safe to enter. By definition, that tactic is indiscriminate and it's a war crime. And this is how we conducted ourselves during the 3 weeks of this operation.
Wow. I mean, just hearing him talk about this, Jason, initially I was going to ask you what drew you to this project, but I mean, I can't imagine how you could not be when you hear the type of, I don't want to use the word atrocity because it's overused oftentimes, but just the type of events that happen that again, are just so disturbing.
Sure, and I think, earlier I froze up a bit because I felt like it was my cue to say, hear these incredibly shocking, horrible things we saw there, except that I wasn't surprised by the time I got there on the ground. That was what we were there to see. That's, of course, you research the story, you know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I was surprised by was that even the families of the people affected had a healthy dose of skepticism about what caused this. And I think their big frustration was they were surprised at the American government's unwillingness to help figure out what is causing this, figure out if they're responsible, willing to basically lift a finger to find out, to get to the bottom of what happened.
Why is that? Is that just willful ignorance? We'd rather just not know?
Well, and again, I think Congressman McDermott touches on this in our interview with him, but part of the problem is that they might not, they being the Pentagon, might not actually want to find out that some of these weapons used on the ground are actually poisonous in some way and have like toxic after effects. They've never studied. I think they started using uranium depleted munitions in the first Gulf War. I don't think there's, or maybe even Bosnia, I don't think there's ever been a real study on the toxic after effects. So if they find out that there's a problem with these, then they're going to lose these weapons. And Ross, you know this better than anyone, but these weapons are, they use the uranium because it's such a dense metal, and it reinforces the munitions so they can penetrate or shield infantry. So to find out that this stuff might not be good means they might lose a really valuable weapon in their arsenal.
Right.
I think that the U.S. Has established itself as a military power with an incredible genius for coming up with new and exciting ways to kill people. And I mean, that's what these weapons do, and they do what they're designed to do, and hats off to the engineers. I'm not here to debate if war, the legitimacy of this particular war, but there is inherent in any war a responsibility to clean up the mess. It's the Pottery Barn rule. It's like we did break it, so now what? And I think this is something that Ross can speak to. Kind of one of the issues is that these weapons kill more than their intended target. It's fine to like say this is a guy we've deemed as bad and we need to take out. Fine, they did that. I'm not, I won't say fine. Ross will
I got your
argue.
point, though.
But the point is,
but it's foreseeable as well.
People who are not in the site.
Right, and that's what's problematic, right? Because it's foreseeable. The argument has always been that there's always going to be collateral damage in war. That there will always be people. It's just a necessary part of war. But part of what military technology has been about over the last few decades has been creating more efficient weaponry so that we don't have the collateral damage, so that we don't have the level of innocence killed. I mean, the whole argument against drone strikes or for drone strikes has been that we can be more precise and less dangerous, not just for troops, but for area people. The argument with these technologies has been, but it's not true, right? I mean, part of what we're learning is that it's not true.
It's not true, but there's two parts to this. One, the phenomenon is, the weaponry is supposed to get more precise. But two, it's also serving to distance us from the act of war and the act of killing. And that's the real, I think, that's the kind of, cultural disease. In this country, we were shielded from the horror of war. There was no draft. No one was forced to go and experience the horror of Fallujah firsthand. And so it was at a remove. And I think with this new generation of weaponry, and that kind of leads us into drone territory, it's becoming more and more surgical. Sure, potentially, Ross would disagree, but
certainly not as surgical as they would have us believe.
Yeah, but B, it's also becoming much more of a phantom and less real. And so. Again, why would anyone really care? Someone in a base in Nevada is controlling a drone in Pakistan, and why do I really care anymore?
Exactly. We're joined on the phone right now by Congressman McDermott. Again, he represents the 7th District in Washington State. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
We've been talking so far about Fallujah. We've talked about the damage that has been done. We've talked about some of the awful effects of uranium and phosphorus on young people, on their bodies, on their development. We've talked about the environmental effects, and we've talked obviously to not just Eddie and Jason, but also Ross, who's been on the ground there, about what it really looks like in these theaters, what it really looks like on the ground to be engaged in this type of war project. Tell me why this matters to you. There are a lot of people in this house who don't care, or who at least aren't responding. Tell me why this matters to you.
Well, I was a physician, a psychiatrist in the the Vietnam era, and I saw people coming back from Vietnam and heard all the stories about Agent Orange and all the things that were going on over there. And people felt like it was problematic, but nobody would pay attention. Over the course of my life in medicine since 1980 or 70, when I got back from the military, I have seen Agent Orange be identified as an agent that causes all kinds of problems. And I've seen the VA pick it up and begin to treat it as a war injury and pay disability and so forth as a result of this. Now, when I went to Iraq in 1995, 1995, just after we had, or 91, excuse me, it was 91, after we had done the Gulf War around Kuwait, I heard reports from people, and they told me that there was all kinds of problems with birth defects and childhood leukemia and all kinds of stuff. And I came back and tried to find out what I could about it, and I couldn't find anybody who was keeping any records. I found that the United States had apparently asked the World Health Organization not to do a study. There was all kinds of efforts to show that we simply were not looking at what I thought was a potential Agent Orange for this generation. And then I got you get reports now in 2013 from hospitals in Basra where they've had a 17-fold increase in child defects. And you have to say to yourself, boy, there's an awful lot of evidence accumulating that suggests that that depleted uranium or something about the warfare we're carrying on now is having a huge effect. And so as a physician and as somebody who's been interested in global health and world health I've been in Africa and all kinds of places, I look at this as something that is an epidemic that we are creating with our own military, and we're obviously affecting nationals in these countries like Iraq, but we're also putting our own soldiers through it. And there have been some reports of units in the military that had problems with miscarriages and that sort of thing when they came back from the war in Iraq. And so my interest here is a public health one in trying to figure out what we're doing and how can we stop it. We look at all the cancers in the world, and very often we find that the cancers are caused by man-made agents that we're putting in the environment.
But you know, Congressman, one of the challenges has been getting people to simply not even acknowledge it, but to investigate it. We have a comment coming in our HuffPost community by Robert999, who says the science team should be sent to Iraq with proper test equipment and get definitive proof. I didn't get the sense that Robert was saying that to disagree as much as to say, look, we have the resources right now to figure out what's going on, to make a persuasive and compelling argument that this is causing damage that's unintended, right, and undesirable. We can do that. Why is there not the political will? Why is there not the investment from members of Congress, from the military, from our intelligence agencies to investigate this and actually get at the root of the problem?
Well, I think it's probably the answer is not a simple one. It is partly that DU makes our weaponry much more effective, and so the military is not interested in doing something that's going to take away the effectiveness of our bullets and our mortar shells and so forth, and the armament that's loaded out of tanks that'll go through one tank and keep on going and go through a second tank. They want that kind of shell to be available. So you've got, on one side, you've got people who want this weaponry to be kept. Then on the second side it's sometimes, as we say, there's collateral damage. Well, stuff happens. And so a lot of it is sort of blown away by that kind of attitude. Well, in war, stuff happens. And then there are those people who have probably got some suspicions about the uranium oxide that's created when one of these shells exploded and is inhaled and then enters the body and goes through whatever systems of the body. They if they find something about it, what are they going to do about it? So in some ways, if you don't know there's a problem, you don't have to fix it.
Right.
And one way not to know there's a problem is don't look.
Right. And that's the willful ignorance I was talking about earlier. Justice Holmes, another member of our community, writes in and says, I didn't mean to absolve Obama. He is so blind on these issues. It is one of the reasons I have lost respect for him. People are really pushing back against President Obama on this war stuff, on this foreign policy front, but in particular on this issue in Iraq. Is this a blind spot for President Obama, or has he also made a decision to look away so that he doesn't have to really make a tough decision?
Well, I think it's really unfair to put it all on President Obama. That stuff started under the Bushes when they, when George Bush Sr. Just laid a waste of the Iraqi army. And in fact, in '91, it didn't have to happen. Saddam Hussein was already withdrawing his troops, but we wouldn't give him time to let him bring the troops out of Kuwait. We wanted to have a war, and we demolished him and used this weaponry in great detail. We went to Baghdad and we shot smart bombs right down through the tower, the communications tower for the telephone system. We hit all the pumping stations for the sewer system. We were intent upon destroying Iraq. And so this was set in motion long before President Obama came on the scene. And I wish that, and in fact, I've talked to people at CDC, and they talk about this as being something they ought to spend some time looking at, but they need money. And, we got sequester, so we're cutting money. So it's easy to blame one person, but that truly, I think, is very unfair to put it all on the president. I mean, there's plenty of people who could take responsibility for what's not happening today.
Ross, you hear this stuff, and I got to ask you, man, and as a soldier, as someone who risked his life on what you thought was a principled military intervention, when you hear about the weapons that are being used, when you hear about a commitment not to discovering the negative effects, when you hear about money not being available to investigate, but seemingly boundless money to prosecute the war itself, when you hear all of this, how does it make you feel as a soldier and as a citizen?
Well, before I get too sidetracked with this question, first I'd like to add something to what the congressman was saying.
Yes, please do.
It's not exactly clear what these weapons are that have caused this health crisis in Fallujah. They may be depleted uranium weapons, or they may be some other type of weapon. And since we don't know, these weapons very well may be in use in Afghanistan right now. In fact, there's at least one study, to my knowledge, that found high levels of enriched uranium in urine samples from Afghan civilians who live near bombing sites. It's also very possible that the Israeli military is using these weapons as well, because the very same isotopes of uranium was found in a bombing site in southern Lebanon, and the people who live near that area were affected by it also. So these weapons may still be in use in Afghanistan, and I think President Obama is not doing enough about it.
Wow. As you're talking, Ross, I just want you to know there are some images coming up here, and some of these are graphic images, everyone, so feel free to avert your eyes if you don't want to see it, if you can't take it, which I completely understand. But we see here images of young people with birth defects, things literally growing out of their brains. Can you run that one more time? I hate to show this because it's graphic, but we need to show it because people need to know exactly what's going on. I mean, look at these young people, these poor innocent children who are feeling the effects, people being born with deformed hands, people being born with limbs in the wrong place, babies, we're talking about babies here who are suffering, people having things growing out of strange spots. We have children with 6 toes here. We see people with feet turned around. I mean, all of this is the impact of what we've done. This is the work that we have done. I can't say that enough, and I want you all to see that, Ross. I hated to interrupt you, but I did not want us to go another moment without seeing exactly what's happening. Again, for you as a soldier, for you as someone who went there in good faith, how does this, and combined with those images, make you feel?
Well, it's not a good feeling. I'm very aware that I was involved in war crimes, and what we did hurt a lot of people, and it's hurting the next generation also. It's not an easy thing to live with, and I'm also very aware that what we did was in no way a service to our country. It was in no way a service to the Iraqi population. There's nothing to feel good about, just shame.
Can I step in and say one thing here? This is not all to be put on this young gentleman who's on the program.
None of it is. To me, I want to be clear, Congressman, and I hate to interrupt you, but I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that Ross should feel any shame or any blame.
But we should all we all have to do it. All of Americans.
All of us do. But Ross, you're a hero. You risked your life in good faith. You did nothing wrong here. This is not on your shoulders at all.
I appreciate that, but I don't think I'm a hero. I don't think we did anything heroic. Nothing good came of what we did. I don't have any problem admitting that. It's the truth. It's the truth. It doesn't make me feel good, and I don't like seeing the parades that treat us as heroes when in fact we didn't do anything heroic. I don't like being thanked for my service because I didn't serve my country. I don't like this hero treatment that I get in this country because I don't feel that I deserve. I don't feel that our military deserves it. We were involved in a legal conflict and a moral conflict, and that's nothing to that doesn't deserve support.
I was just going to add to that. I think, you know, with the anniversary of the invasion, I think this country, all of us, need to start accepting responsibility for the war and its aftermath. And I think also that it is a massive psychological trauma to this country that we're only beginning to appreciate. And there are other problems, not to minimize this, but there are other issues. With especially in the veteran population coming back, PTSD, and there's a lot of prescription drug abuse, which leads to a lot of suicide and a lot of drug addiction. It's a big deal, and I don't think we were rushed into war under false pretenses. This country is just now starting to deal with it on an emotional, psychological, and a moral and political level.
Yeah. Well, the work you all are doing, particularly on this issue, is helping us come to terms with that, and that's necessary. Is this the kind of stuff we're going to see on Vice?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we have this amazing new platform at HBO, a half-hour program where we can do our investigative reports. You know, this story that Jason and Shane did is exactly the template of the kinds of stories that you'll see. It's real news reporting. It's real documentary filmmaking. And we get to reach out to people like Ross and the congressman and tap their experiences and their passion and dedication for real stories that need to be told.
And you all have a team of people working with you. I mean, you have Fareed Zakaria is working, Bill Maher.
Bill Maher's on the...
that's pretty amazing. I mean, what kind of influence do those kind of voices have on the work you all are doing?
You know, Fareed is an expert on foreign affairs and international relations and economics and politics of all kinds and history. Bill Maher is incredibly engaged in current events and social and political issues. He's one of the, you know, sort of best well-read people that I know. These guys are just like, have been grafted onto the Vice team. They feel like one of us. They feel like family. And, you know, I'm really proud of the work that we're all doing together.
Well, you should be proud. And what other stuff can we expect coming up?
We are doing a piece on the veterans and the problem with prescription drug abuse.
Okay.
But we also have segments in China. We have segments on North Korea coming up. Yeah, we're kind of all over the globe and
literally.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll give you another issue if you want one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Congressman, I'll take it any day.
We have introduced Walter Jones and I from North Carolina a resolution creating a commission about the war and healing the wounds of war. And we are trying to set a presidential commission that will discuss the whole issue of where this country is in terms of how we deal with bringing our troops back home, how we help them decompress, why we're having the episodes of suicide both in and out of the military, all the things that are happening, the joblessness, the wife beatings, all the things that happen, because we warn people out in Iraq and Afghanistan by sending them over for 6 and 7 tours of duty, and then bringing them home and dropping them in their town with no support that really helps them deal with what it's all about. Sebastian Junger, who's done Restrepo, and Karl Marlantis, who wrote a book called What You Need to Know When You Go to War, are helping me and Walter put this commission together, because we need to have a national conversation about what we're up to in this country and how we treat our veterans when they come home. It's not anti-war or for war or anything else. It is how we treat the people that we send out to do what you heard described earlier. We bring them back, and we don't make them feel whole. They should feel whole, because we take the responsibility for what they did. The samurai did that. Native American tribes did that to their warriors. And we in this country have got to learn to do that with our warriors.
No, absolutely. I think we can all agree on that. Before I let you guys go, Jason, word on the street is you hung out in North Korea.
I have been to North Korea.
With our chief foreign policy expert, right? Dennis Rodman.
Yeah, it's lovely there this time of year, and it was an amazing trip.
Come on, you gotta give me something. Dennis Rodman, North Korea. What's going on with that, man?
I will tell you that Kim Jong-un, here's the bit of intelligence I can share with you, is that Kim Jong-un has a sense of humor.
Really? Oh, he must. He's hanging out with Dennis Rodman.
And there was a bit of a frat boy moment in which he was dissatisfied with the manner in which I downed my shot, or more appropriately failed to drink my drink.
So just so I'm clear, Kim Jong-un basically called you a pansy for not taking a shot straight to the head.
Something like that. Well, actually, I made the mistake of toasting with a full glass of scotch while everyone else had small glasses of, Pyongyang soju, and then I was basically implored to bottoms up. So.
Wow. One of the great dictators in the world dissed you for how you drank. How'd that make you feel, sir?
Well, I mean, that's the most insane person who's ever given me shit.
That's a pretty big honor, man. That's a pretty big honor. Any insight on Dennis Rodman, though? What was it like with him hanging out over there?
Well, for that, you're going to have to wait for the season finale, which will be airing on episode 10, June 14th on HBO. So
well done, sir!
Thank you.
Well done. The entire series is awesome. Now, everybody, make sure you check it out. Every opportunity you have to check out Vice on HBO, you must do it, because they put a spotlight on some of the key issues. It's smart, it's exciting, it's interesting, and it airs when?
Friday nights at 11.
Friday nights at 11, so watch it, set your DVRs, make sure you check it out. It's super important. Eddie, Jason, thanks for hanging out with us. Ross, I don't care what you say. I'm grateful to you for the work you're doing right now. Justice for Fallujah is a big deal. You're a big deal, and I'm grateful for all the service and sacrifices you're making right now to make all of us whole again. And Congressman McDermott, again, there are a few people in Congress doing the work that you're doing on this issue, and we thank you for it, sir.